Hello and welcome back to Thought Exchange. I'm your host, Nigel, and today I am going to, first, we are in a new place. We are not in my usual cove, nor my alternative usual cove. Um, doesn't really matter where I am, but I figure I would point it out. I also got new light, which is eventually going to be cool, I think. I don't know where to put it. I don't know what color to put it on yet. I don't know anything about lighting, but we'll get there. Um, Today's episode is going to be about hard work, um, the intricacies of identifying what hard work actually is, and not the colloquial meaning, but what it means on an individual level for the niche that you're pursuing, sustainability in that hard work, and then kind of projecting forward from being able to implement the things we're going to talk about, and also doing a little backtracking to help us understand why our understanding of hard work and sustainability and productivity is kind of a little corrupted, or it's not the most productive mindset or productive perspective on those concepts. But without further ado, let's get into it. So to begin, let's define what hard work is. I think to some extent we're all familiar with doing some hard work. Whether it was in school or our current job or a sport, putting in the extra effort to accomplish something for the sake of being better at it, for the sake of growth and taking it seriously. And I'm probably going to use the word serious a lot throughout this podcast. But that's one of the best words that I could come up with in terms of your intent that you come into the work with, that you come into the job. And work itself, the word, as I mentioned earlier, kind of is corrupted in this way, as a lot of people, including myself when I was younger, associate work with just kind of doing things, right? When we're in grade school, just doing math problems, right? You're not accomplishing anything external. It's purely doing math problems for the sake of getting better at doing math problems. And there's kind of these two sides of what I want to redefine hard work as. And one of those sides is the actual impact and effect, right? So you can work hard on something that is essentially meaningless, right? Like in a virtual world. Like if you're playing Clash of Clans or League of Legends or something like that. You may get enjoyment out of it, that's fine, but it provides no actual tangible benefit to the people around you or, the world. The other side of that coin is how much effort you're actually putting in. How much quality, time, and attention and productivity is coming out of the hours that you spend on this subject. So if we go back to the first side of that coin, which is the kind of work, how valuable it is. As I mentioned, when you're in school, you're kind of just doing things to do things. It's busy work, essentially. It has the purpose of reinforcing, neural pathways to make you familiar with ways of thinking, but it also kind of corrupts your ability to see things on the bigger picture, right? Because when you get into a real job, you're not going to be doing math problems for the sake of doing math problems. You're not going to be doing a presentation for the sake of doing a presentation, right? Rarely are you doing something simply for the sake of just doing that thing. It ends up being, end goal oriented. And those goals are what drive the nuanced decisions you make in the process. So the way you give your presentation and design it will now be impacted by the fact that maybe it's a sales presentation. So it's no longer just masturbatory doing things for the sake of doing them without any real context or value proposition at the end. There are, I would say, two things mainly you want to consider. You want to consider your innate ability, your talent, right? If you played a sport, some people are more talented than others. Some people can catch a ball, some people can throw a ball, some people can hit a ball, some people can run fast. So those give you inclinations into where you could go, but I also want to point out that just because you're good at something doesn't mean you should do it. Because if you hate it, then what does it matter, right? And typically, when we are good at something, we enjoy it more, which is why a lot of times starting new tasks, learning new skills can be frustrating. It's because we suck at them. We suck at them in the beginning, and if we suck at them in the beginning, then it's just repeated failures over and over again, and that's why it's not as enjoyable. But once you get good at something, if you've ever been the best in your class or the best on the team at something, typically we enjoyed doing that thing. But if you find that you're good at something and you don't enjoy it, that's kind of a red flag. And you'd probably want to stay away from that because your brain or your personality or whatever it is so not in alignment with that task, despite you in being better than other people at it, you still don't enjoy it. So your innate ability, and the other side of that is your interest, which is, enjoyment. If you're interested in something, even if you're not good at it, that is, in my opinion, a much higher value. That is of much more importance to be able to freely and without regret invest time into something, regardless of your skill level at the beginning, because the biggest thing that will predict or facilitate your success long term is finding something that you can do better than other people. And there's essentially two ways, which we just talked about, to be better than other people. You're either born with it or you invested so much time into it that you became better. And the best way, the easiest way, and the simplest way to facilitate investing obscene amounts of time into a certain skill set or a certain area or profession is to be interested in it. So that's kind of the hierarchy. Be interested, and if you're lucky, you'll be interested and good at it. Now, during the last solo episode, we talked a lot about willpower and sustainability, and I'm going to harp on that again here because sustainability is dictated by your willpower, and a few other factors like just your health, your ability to continue going. But sustainability is an important subfactor of working hard, because like I mentioned earlier, we can all work hard for a little bit, right? We've all pulled all-nighters doing a paper, doing a bunch of math problems, whatever it is, studying for an exam, right? That was a snippet of working hard. But if we want to achieve true success on the scale of years or our life, then it's going to take a more concerted and sustained effort than staying up all night studying. And the only way to do that is through sustainable practices, which is why interest is so important, because willpower isn't drained if you're doing something that you're interested in, right? I can only sit here and do algebra for so long because I'm not particularly interested in doing algebra problems. So it's draining my willpower every time I start a new problem. Whereas if you sat me here and had me read a book on, oration or some scientific discovery, I'd be way more interested in that. So it wouldn't take up willpower. I would be inclined to do that regardless. And you want to design your life and your day and your work schedule in a way that it leans into what you're inclined to do already. One of the most interesting parts of this is that you have some control over what you're interested in. To some people that's obvious, to some people that may sound like, what are you talking about? But if you think about the things that you enjoy, or the things that you have enjoyed, the phases of your life where you've liked one thing over another, or one person over another, our hobbies can switch like that, or we can stick with them for a long time. And there, in my opinion, at least, and in my experience, there's definitely a conscious, concerted aspect to that, where I remember when I used to skateboard as a kid. I skateboarded for a couple years, and then I remember starting to enjoy football. And, there was kind of this decision point. Even though I enjoyed both of them, I decided to invest in football instead. I decided to be more interested in that. And it's kind of like letting yourself like something, right? Because we can take the enjoyment out of things that we should enjoy, right? You can be in a perfectly pleasant day, walking out in the sun on a beautiful day, and put yourself in the mindset to not enjoy it, right? Whether you're doing it on purpose or not, you have that ability to do it. And it's like the reverse of that. Well, not exactly the reverse, because they're, neutral things, right? Skateboarding, football, whatever. But picking, okay, these are things that I like. Which of these things am I going to allow myself to really like? Or if if you have a friend or someone you want to be more than a friend, you can decide, I can tell if I spend more time with this person, I'm going to really like them. And maybe I can foresee that that is going to work because they're a coworker or they're in a relationship already. So what can I do? I can make the conscious decision not to invest in this friendship, relationship too much as to avoid the problem in the first place. It's the same with the hobby. I could have said, oh, why would I start a new hobby? Let's not start playing football. Let's just focus on skateboarding. I didn't do that, right? In the same way, now that we're, self-actualized to some extent adults, and we can be aware of these processes that as children we essentially had no understanding of. You can tell yourself, okay, the perfect example for me is like video games. I know that I can get very invested in a video game. So if I choose not to buy the game and not to play the game, I'm making a conscious decision about about an interest, and saying I'm not going to allow myself to be interested in this thing, right? That's the most obvious example for me, and probably that's very relatable, because there are plenty of great video games out there that would absorb all of our time if we didn't make that conscious decision to, I'm not going to get invested in that, because that's going to be a huge time suck. But you can do that with all of your interests, all of your pursuits. It doesn't just have to be a off-the-cuff thing or relegated to, entertainment. So if you want to focus on football, focus on football. If you want to focus on making a new app, focus on making a new app. And make that conscious decision to steer yourself away from all of these distractions and things that may be important and you may have interest in otherwise, and maybe you'll come back to at a later time, but for the purpose of getting sustained hard work done for this current set of goals, you'll decide, I'm not going to be interested in that for now. I'm not going to pursue that, and I'm not going to invest time into that. So now that we know that we can choose, to some extent, the things we're going to be interested in, and that our interest is one of the two things that is most important in committing to sustained hard work, interest and innate ability, now we have this kind of advantage on 50% of the issue, because interest is 50% and we can kind of choose what we have interest in. And as I mentioned before, innate ability is not as important as I think it's played out to be, right? When you interview plenty of musicians or athletes or, coders or whatever it is, it's not a story of I was just always better than everyone else. It's always a story of I put in more work than everyone else. Maybe there was innate talent there in the beginning, but the innate talent of a 15-year-old is not good enough to propel you into the NFL or the NHL or whatever professional sports league, or become a international, star in the music industry. It comes with additional work. We've decided that we're going to do hard work now. We've decided what we're going to do it in, our interest, and that we're going to make it sustainable so that it's practical for a long-term goal. Now that we've made those decisions, we need to break down what is sustainability. What does that mean? We've defined hard work as something that's productive to society at large and putting in a great deal of effort and investment. So let's define sustainability. So sustainability is being able to repeat that day in and day out. And at the highest level, it's without any breaks in terms of days off, right? Obviously, you can work for only so many hours in a day before the quality of your work suffers. And I'll get to that later. But the way I like to think about sustainability and willpower is it's just a bar. It's a bar that fills and empties, and it fills and empties every day. It fills when you wake up, maybe not all the way. Maybe you have some amount that you regain every night when you sleep peacefully, hopefully. And doing things you don't like or don't want to do, drain that bar. That's the simplest way of looking at it for me. And everything I do in a given day has an impact on that. It might be minute, it might be grand, right? Getting out of bed, for me, not a great drain on my willpower. For some people, that's one of the hardest parts of the day. And this is why it's individualized. You have to design your day to your life, to your pursuit, to your interest, so that you can find your hard work or your ability to sustainably do hard work. At the start of the day, I think one of the most effective ways of reducing the drain on willpower is having a routine. Because willpower is almost like expending free will. It's like, burning up a little free will as fuel to do something. And when you have a schedule and habits formed, you no longer have to think about the next task, which burns up a little bit of that free will. So when you get up, and it's your natural habit to, as soon as you wake up, not hit snooze, cancel your alarm, get out, put your clothes on, hit the gym, and you haven't even had a meaningful conscious thought yet, that's a win, in my opinion. You pointed your subconscious and all the other layers of whatever's going on in there in a direction that's productive for you, and maybe it's not going to the gym in the morning, maybe it's starting by, journaling, or maybe it's starting by, hopping right on your computer and drafting a, what do you call it, email letter? An email letter? Is that what it's called? Something you email to people every day. A daily newsletter, right? So because you've turned something into a habit, it no longer drains that willpower bar. And you've now gotten almost free work out of yourself. Innately, there are certain things you're going to do, right? That don't require conscious thought. They don't require exercising, higher cognitive ability. They're just things that you're going to do. And as I spoke about earlier, how you can choose your interests, you can also choose these things to some extent as well. And that's what your habits are. That's what your schedules are. You can choose to just wake up and go to the gym every day, right? Now, it takes concerted effort to start the habit. I'm not discounting that. I'm not going to say that isn't going to be difficult, but this is a long-term process of doing sustainable hard work. So finding out what are these things that I can implement into my day that are low enough overhead mentally that they can be turned into habits. And once you decide, or once you figure out which parts of your day can be turned into habits instead of having to constantly think about them, it opens up all of this, at least for me, space mentally, right? It's not something I have to worry about. It's not something I have to think about. It's not something I have to even set aside time for because I know it's going to happen. And I've regimented it so well that I know exactly when it's going to start and when it's going to end. You know, an example for me is editing, right? Now, it's just a habit to sit down and edit, whether it's clips or long form. It doesn't really matter. Whereas at the beginning of this, making these videos, editing was a chore. Part of that was because I wasn't good at it, which is why these things are difficult to start. And part of it was just, oh yeah, I remember I have to edit now. It wasn't a habit yet. It wasn't built into my day, into my routine to sit down and edit videos or to record new videos. But now that I've been doing it for months, it's, I don't even have to think about editing a video. It's literally automatic. Now that we've gotten through the morning, right, we've set up our routine, our schedule, and designed it the way we want to. And of course, as I mentioned, I'm simplifying this. I know that process is more difficult than I'm making it out to be. But we're talking about, ideally, how do we want to set up our life? How do we want to set up our morning? How are we going to attempt to design our time, make the makeup of our day in order to point us towards our goal? And now that we've gotten through the morning, we can think about our conscious efforts. We've talked about habits, which are unconscious. Now we're going to talk about our conscious efforts. The best way to build and maintain conscious efforts is through the proper types of reinforcement. So that's negative reinforcement and positive reinforcement, which I touched on a little bit earlier. So when you do something that you're supposed to do, right, when you sit down and get to your work, finding some way to positively reinforce yourself to do that is going to add to that subconscious layer to point you in that right direction, right? It won't necessarily turn it into a habit if it's something that takes a lot of cognitive ability, but having that little push internally to where, oh, if I start doing this, I get this good thing, And sometimes you got to think of yourself almost as like a Pavlovian dog, right? You got to give yourself a treat when you do something good, and you got to, punish yourself when you do something bad. And it's all predicated on you being as honest with yourself as possible. It's easy to lie to yourself about productivity, about excuses, about how much you're getting done or why you're not getting certain things done. And what predicates all of this is being honest with yourself. And maybe I'll add more about that later. But if every time you, let's say for me, when I write down a outline for an episode, these topics, if I just do that, I decide, okay, at 5 p.m. every day, I'm going to sit down and write this, and I'm going to get up and move on with the other tasks of the day. That's great, but we're trying to work on making this as sustainable as possible. How can I give myself a reward in some small way that will encourage me, even when I don't feel like doing that, to sit down and write? And this interestingly links with our ability to choose our interests, right? And be able to choose the things that we want, essentially, to some extent. what makes this so powerful is that you can choose a reward that you want to view as a reward that you don't necessarily view as a reward yet, right? And human psychology is super interesting in this way. But let's say I sit down and I write and I reward myself and I think of it in this terminology, in this language. I'm going to reward myself with, let's be as blatant about it as possible, a plate of broccoli, right? Now, I personally like broccoli, but a lot of people don't like vegetables. But if you sit down and let's say you don't like broccoli, but you reiterate in your mind, I'm rewarding myself with broccoli. You'll train yourself to actually view the consumption of broccoli as a positive thing. And then on top of that, you're viewing, sitting down and writing as a positive thing because you're being rewarded. So it's kind of this double, two birds with one stone. You can choose to reward yourself with something that is maybe meh, isn't that great? And you can build the conditioning of rewarding yourself because it's not just the thing that you get that is the reward. It is knowing that you accomplished the thing that deserves a reward. So regardless of what that reward is, you get a little bump of reinforcement there. Now the fact that it's broccoli and you happen to not like broccoli doesn't matter for that aspect of it. And over time, you will begin to appreciate broccoli in a different way. You will associate it with success and or accomplishment of whatever you're doing, and you'll be able to enjoy it more. Now, like I said, this ability to choose our interests and our wants is very powerful, but it's not unlimited, right? I can't, well, maybe some people can, but I can't take a task that I absolutely hate, right? Like cleaning a toilet and be like, I'm going to reward myself for writing by cleaning the toilet, right? Maybe there's a better way of framing it. I'm going to reward myself by making my living space cleaner. But there are limitations. Regardless, I think it's a very effective strategy for choosing the things that we want and also reinforcing the things that we want as well, reinforcing the things we want to accomplish. And then negative reinforcement, one of the easiest ways to think about this is like notes to yourself, right? If there's some barrier as well to what would cause you to be distracted. So let's say you live in an apartment, there's not a ton of space. Your workspace is also your living space, is also maybe your sleeping space or your entertainment space. So there's always distractions around. Maybe you put a note on your TV that says get back to work, or you can be as what hurts you the most, right? So you can be as vindictive towards yourself or as soft towards yourself as you want or as you need to be. But you could, write a note on the TV that says, like a sticky note, you're going to be a failure if you keep watching TV, right? It's a little extreme, but I'm being extreme to make it obvious as to what you're doing here. So that if you try to use the TV and you have a sticky note on the center of the TV, or, you name the TV through the casting function, you name it, get back to work, you lazy whatever. Every time you go to that instance, go to that distraction, you're going to be reinforced and you're going to be forced to be consciously aware that you're not doing the thing that you told yourself you're going to do. Because it's very easy to subconsciously just be like, turn on the TV or turn on a YouTube video or whatever it may be. But to avoid that, put something that is interpretable or that is so obviously negative or painful that it's going to steer you away from that regardless. It's like if every time you went for the remote, your hand got shocked when you pressed to turn on the TV, right? That's a an obvious, painful way where you don't have to think about it, but you're like, oh shit. It snaps you out of this useless behavior you're about to partake in to, um, back to higher level thinking and being like, okay, yeah, I have to get back to work. A fairly benign example of this is, um, like putting your phone on airplane mode, right? You go to check texts or Instagram or whatever it is, and you can't access it, right? Now, consciously, you have to do some problem solving. Why can't you access it? Oh, because it's on airplane mode. Why is it on airplane mode? Because I set it there because I'm trying to accomplish something else. All of these nudges in the right direction, the direction that you've chosen to be the right direction, they're going to add up, right? They may seem minuscule at an individual level, but if every time you went to check your phone, you didn't waste 5 minutes checking your phone, you just saw that you didn't have connection and went back to work, or every time you went to turn on your TV, you didn't lose an hour to watching an episode of a show or more, those things add up. Not just in that day, but remember we're talking about the context of sustainability over time and probably over the course of years, because most long-term goals that will achieve the kind of success that most people think of when they think of success take years to accomplish. So when we're able to do that for years, an hour here and there adds up to days and weeks and months of time that isn't lost anymore. You've been returned time to accomplish things. The next part of this is the work itself. Deciding whether the work you're doing is worth doing. This is probably the hardest of all of these, of all the things we're going to talk about today, right? Putting a sticky note on your TV or putting your phone on airplane mode. Pretty simple things, right? Pretty easy ways to induce negative reinforcement. Giving yourself some kind of reward, easy to do. But being able to be honest with yourself about the work that you're doing is very difficult. Because obviously you have some kind of bias because you're doing it in the first place. And, it may clash with your interest, right? You may be interested in something that isn't particularly, worthwhile, at least in the perspective of being productive. And I'll reuse the example from earlier in video games, right? Many of us have sunk hundreds, if not thousands, if not tens of thousands of hours into, virtual worlds, games, Minecraft, Destiny, League, whatever it is. And I think most of us know those aren't, particularly productive uses of time. And we can tell ourselves, and as I'm sure some people do, that they are productive, that, I'm increasing my hand-eye coordination, or, some nonsense, essentially, right? Not to say that isn't true, but, is that going to help you achieve your goal as a programmer? No. So being able to decide and distinguish whether or not the work you're doing can be very difficult. Video games is the obvious answer, right? That's the obvious one where it's like you're literally just playing in a virtual world. And clearly the things you do in the game have little to no impact on reality. But that's different when you're deciding whether the app you're working on is going to be worthwhile, or if you should switch, or if the album you're working on is going to be worthwhile and you should switch. I think one of the interesting things about school and video games, and this is all, speculation, right? But they almost train you in school to do things for no reason. And I'm talking about grade school and also someone's college, right? There are meaningful assignments in college, but there's still plenty of busy work, doing math problems for the sake of doing math problems, you know. And in the same way, in video games, you're I would describe it as pretending to do something serious, right? Let's say you're playing Call of Duty, right? Obviously war is a serious thing. You're pretending to do something serious, right? When you're doing a math problem, is that what, you know, a mathematician or a physicist actually does? They just sit down and people give them math problems and they just do them? No. You don't just solve mx plus b over and over again. Y equals mx plus b. There's, a larger, grander picture. So when you tell kids over and over again for decades to just sit down and do things for the sake of doing things, I feel like that translates pretty well to video games, where it's like there is no grander picture. You're just playing the game for the sake of playing the game, right? And there's a pretend grander picture in the sense that, okay, you'll get a higher grade in school, or you'll get a higher rank in a game, but it really distorts, and I'm talking about school here, your ability to realize what real productivity is. And that's a big part of what makes later in life it difficult to be honest with yourself about whether the work you're doing is meaningful or productive enough or in the right vein. Because maybe the work you're doing satisfies all of the other requirements we've talked about. You're able to positively reward yourself when doing it. You're able to negatively reinforce behavior that distracts you from it. You're interested in it. Maybe you have some innate ability in it, and you're able to sink 10 hours a day into doing it, right? That sounds like a great thing, right? Whatever that is, that should be the thing you do. But then you realize that's Minecraft. And it's like, okay, well, that's great, but there's a very small chance you're going to be able to make anything, productive out of playing Minecraft 10 hours a day. It's a great, fun game. Maybe you can do it on YouTube or something like that, but of the opportunity available to make that your means of being productive in society and providing for yourself or your family in the future, it's not the basket you'd want to put all of your eggs in. So you'd have to be honest with yourself that regardless of all these, objectively good metrics, the quality of the work you're doing is not there, because despite you putting 10 hours a day consistently, sustainably, it doesn't provide anything. I was reading an essay by Paul Graham, and it talked about some of these subjects. And one of the things he brought up was this idea of pretending to do real things. And to contrast that, also taking not real things seriously. And maybe that's closer to what I was saying about video games. And kind of getting lost in either of those is not what you want, right? Doing math problems for the sake of doing math is useless. And playing video games for the sake of playing video games, or let's say taking video games very seriously, which is kind of, I think, was his point. He didn't use video games, but even taking something seriously that doesn't matter is also not particularly important or useful. Which is why things like video games and sports can be valuable for getting the right mindset, but can also be traps for ending up just getting so invested in that, right? And I'm an athlete. I love sports. I also, used to play plenty of video games. but it's a stepping stone, right? It's a way for young people and children to learn what taking something seriously means, right? Athletics are the first time you get to take something serious, because in academics, especially as a young kid, not so much in maybe high school and college and beyond, but as a young kid, academics are for the sake of academics. You do the math to do the math. You write the paper to write the paper. You do the case study to do the case study. That case study has been reviewed 1,000,000 times, probably 1,000,000,000 times at this point. The math problems have been solved 1,000,000,000 times. You're not doing it for any real meaning or purpose or value to society other than to do it. Now, the flip side of that is like athletics. And I guess we can throw in esports, video games now too, is taking something so seriously, figuring out how to dedicate yourself to something, how to show commitment and teamwork and all of these very valuable traits, but it's for something that doesn't matter. Because, I mean, when you're a kid, there's not much opportunity to do things that matter because you don't have any skills, right? But getting lost in either one of those is going to lead you to unfulfillment. And unless you're the best of the best playing a sport or playing a video game, and you get lucky on top of that, it's not going to be a productive career for you. And what ends up happening with a lot of, I'll stick with athletes because athletics have been around a lot longer than esports. You know, when they retire from their athletic career, you know, in their mid to late 20s or mid to late 30s, you know, they've been so invested in a game, something that is essentially meaningless. Of course, a lot of people get enjoyment out of it, that there's like this crash that they go through afterward. They've always associated so much of their personal self-worth and value in what is a game, that leaving the game and entering the real world where there are real stakes and real problems and value propositions that their experience doesn't translate to directly, you know, it leaves them in a bad spot, right? That's why you hear about athletes going broke, or athletes, you know, dying so young, or drinking themselves to death, or doing a lot of drugs, or whatever it may be. It's because they got caught up in one of those two, you know, stepping stones, essentially. And as long as you're able to acknowledge that they're stepping stones, you know, you won't fall into those things, and you can take advantage of being the best athlete or the best gamer or whatever it is. But eventually you want to migrate from doing serious work, you know, math, we'll call serious work for no reason, or pretending to do serious work, and graduate from seriously doing pretend work, video game sports, to seriously doing serious work, right? That's the ultimate evolution of this chain, is doing something with the full intent and vigor that you'd put, you know, your life's work behind, all of your time, every day, for years. And not only you're doing that, you're doing it on something that matters, right? You're not doing it about kicking a ball. You're not doing it for, you know, building pixel art. You're doing it for something that will impact people on a positive way on a large, or hopefully eventually a large scale, right? Solving real world problems. And I think that's the pinnacle, and it's hard to reach that until you consciously identify that there's a difference between these things, between pretending to do real work, doing real work on something that doesn't matter, and doing real work for something that does matter. Once you kind of hear it or read it, or whatever medium you're able to internalize that, I think it makes things a lot more clear as to, okay, wow, yeah, maybe I have just been messing around. Maybe I haven't been taking things seriously enough, or maybe I've been working too hard on something that really isn't going to matter. And as I mentioned earlier, you know, games, so sports, video games and such, those are the obvious examples. But there's also that transition as an adult to doing work on things that aren't video games or sports, that is still not particularly meaningful. That is still, from an outside perspective, would be relegated to doing busy work, to doing something that's either not productive or doing it just for the sake of doing it. The last aspect I want to talk about is the amount of effort you can sustainably put into something. For different tasks, that's different amounts, right? And disregarding the impact of the task, we'll play with video games for a second. You could probably play video games all day. You could probably play for 10 hours, 5 days a week if that was your job. But that doesn't mean that for 10 hours you could do data analytics every single day, or let's say 5 days a week. Or for 10 hours you could, write and record music. Or for 10 hours you could, write and record videos. Each individual task has an amount of time that you can spend on it without degrading the quality of your work. Because as you work on something, there's a warm-up period. So you start off at probably the worst you'll be that day in the beginning. And then your brain will warm up to the idea of completing whatever task this is. You'll be good and you'll get better. And then, as you start to burn out for that day, you'll begin to get worse. And unless there is some kind of quota you're trying to reach that is irrelevant to reach, not just doing it for the sake of doing it to try to impress someone and try to impress yourself, or trying, arbitrary standards. Once the quality of your work drops below the threshold that is acceptable, and again, this comes with being honest with yourself, what level of work is acceptable, you need to stop doing that task. So even though for me it can be frustrating not working on something, right? I will feel like I'm restless if I'm not working on something. But I also acknowledge that if I work too much, let's say on writing an outline for a video, it will start getting worse, right? If I go back and continually editing it, the things that I'm adding will take away. So there's this level of self-awareness that you have to be able to say, wow, it's frustrating because I know that I have the time to work maybe 5 hours on this project today, but I know that after hour 3, I'm just not going to be productive enough. Like the quality of my output is not going to be high enough. And so, hey, you have 2 hours to maybe put towards another task, or if you have no other tasks, which you probably have other tasks. But let's say in this magical world, your day is fully maximized, then you can watch your TV. Then you can play your video game or do whatever. And I think that that's really important to note, because, and specifically when I say that, I'm talking about you probably have other tasks to do, right? Sustainability is super important, but I also don't want you to think that it's an excuse, because realistically, you can do more than you're doing right now. You can. And I can. Anyone can. Unless you're the, 0.001% that's truly maximizing their day, you could do more. And I don't want you to use the idea of sustainability as a crutch for doing less, or an excuse for doing less. Because, people all around the world work like 12-hour shifts every single day, or even 16-hour shifts every single day. So the idea that you would burn out after doing something for a couple months or for a couple of years is a self-imposed limitation, right? I think that there is a time and a place for vacations and relaxation and de-stressing. but I think people underestimate how much they're capable of doing, and they also don't want to work as hard as they can at the end of the day, which is fine. I mean, I don't work as hard as I can. Few people do, but I don't want the idea of sustainability to become a crutch in that way. You probably can work harder, and if you're not getting the results you want, try working harder. A lot of the time that's going to be the answer, because you don't need to stop and watch television. You don't need to stop what you're doing and watch YouTube video. You want to, that's great, and if you're willing to make that sacrifice towards your productivity to do that, that's fine, but be honest with yourself. Don't lie to yourself and be like, I need to do this, because you probably don't. You probably don't need to do it at all. Now, life is for enjoyment as much as it is for, being productive. But at least if you're going to take a break, or you're going to take a vacation, or you're going to watch TV during the day, or whatever it is, at least be honest with yourself so that in the future, if push comes to shove, how much more you're going to be capable of doing. All right. Well, let me just recap what we've talked about today. We talked about the two sides to hard work and finding meaningful hard work. We talked about the two sides of finding your particular hard work, and that's your innate ability and your interest. We talked about how there's some flexibility in your interest and your wants, and you can kind of choose what those things are to some degree, which gives you a lot of leverage, right? Because you have autonomy over 50% of that picture. We talked about reinforcement, both positive and negative, to reduce the overhead and just nudge you in the right direction for the task you're trying to complete throughout the day. We talked about setting schedules and routines and habits, especially in the morning, to get you started so that your subconscious mind is just already accomplishing tasks for you that you don't have to think about, that you don't have to, as I said, put that mental overhead behind. And we talked about the different kinds of work. We talked about pretending to do serious things, right? Math for the sake of math. We talked about seriously doing pretend things, which is, taking a sport really seriously or taking a video game really seriously. And we talked about graduating. I would describe it as graduating to putting a serious element behind your work in doing a serious thing. And we've graduated to taking seriously a serious task, right? Putting a concerted effort of all of our time and energy into something that actually matters. We also touched on the last point of making sure that you're not using sustainability as an excuse. There's only so much work you can do on a specific task before the quality is degraded, but there's still probably another task you can work on. And if you're going to take time off or take time for relaxation, don't lie to yourself about it. And saying that you need it, you want it. And that's fine. It's okay to do things that you want. But make sure you make that distinction at the very least to yourself. Thank you so much for watching and listening today. Remember to like, subscribe, and follow to keep up to date with new content as it comes out. I appreciate your support and encourage you to exchange your thoughts in the comments below. As always, keep an open mind.